Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us on the platform today. I'm welcoming the panel of speakers, Cornel de Kok from Saldanha Bay Municipality, Ashley Smith from Amuba TSC, and Jacques Versaghi from Pinnacle. He's responsible for AI and services. I'm not going to have a long introduction this morning. We've got a very full program with a rather big set of slides. So I'm quickly going to hand over to the speakers. They will introduce themselves. Just about Coffee Clutch. It's a learning network, and we hope that you will have your learning experience and that you will take away some knowledge from this platform going into your environments and be able to build on what you learn, and that your takeaways will cause a fruitful environment for yourselves. So I'm handing over to Ashley. Ashley, thank you very much for being online, and please introduce yourself and continue.
Good morning, David. Good morning, everyone else that has joined. David, thanks for the opportunity. My name is Ashley Smith. I'm the COO for Amoeba TSC. We're based in Centurion. We operate mainly in the telco space, but for the last 10 years, we've been involved in the Project Baobab, which is what we'll touch on today briefly. My session will just be a recap of what was presented a few months ago, which is the building blocks. What was the intent of the Baobab project? What have we put in place? Now that we have those building blocks in place, we now have access to real-time data. And over the last 6 months to a year, we have been executing on various, what we call proof of technology projects, from CCTV to metering. And then Cornel will speak around the data that we have captured to date and how we are looking to apply AI and make sure that we can then, let me not say gamify, but how we can engage with the municipality and the citizens in a more real-time manner. So if I can start, what I'm displaying on the screen, I'm just going to make sure I can get all of those up there. This is the construct of the Baobab project. So the idea was to provide a municipal-centric open access fiber network, typical what you have today with all the likes of Vumatel, Frogfoot, everyone else. But this is muni-centric, where the municipal services are on net, are carried at a zero-rated basis, but is putting in place the correct architectural design. Right? So we designed the network from the ground up. We then made sure we understood what we wanted to achieve over the next 5 to 10 years. So this is a long-term play. We then designed that network, which is fiber-based as a default, meaning we can do GPON, XGS-PON, we can do DWDM, and the network is therefore future-ready, meaning low latency, and it can carry all of the aggregate data back over the network. So even if we say, well, we can do wireless, at some point wireless will be aggregated and pulled back over a fiber network. And then once we've got all of that, workforce and asset management, do you know what you have where? To be able to execute in real time and say, I have captured this asset at this location, what is happening at that point? So once we have all of those overlaid in different GIS layers, we can start to orchestrate different customer job flows. And a customer could be the resident, or a customer can be a department, or it can be a business, right? So we'll talk about things like the service orchestration layer, which is a platform that orchestrates jobs between different external parties and existing municipal platforms. Now, once that network is in place, we can actually orchestrate any kind of service. So service providers, in a layman's terms, if you talk about an ISP, open access network, multiple ISPs, but we're extending this even further. Any service that can traverse this network could then be monetized and orchestrated. Could be IoT, value-added services, content delivery networks, cloud-based services. And that was the intent, to provide a single municipal offtake that allows us to collaborate with all service providers in one place. And therefore, products and services can be orchestrated at any given place. Now, imagine that you have all of these services. What are you generating? You're generating quite a lot of data, usage behavior. And I think later on in this presentation with Jacques, he will talk then around how do we provide real-time insights into that data and then present it back into the digital citizen. So hopefully we'll bring that back once you see the digital citizen portion of it as well. Okay. Now, the municipal network, some of the main drivers, just as a quick recap, we want diverse connectivity solutions, wireless, microwave, in some cases, there may even be DSL, IoT, Sigfox, all of those will be aggregated over a network. So being able to connect in multiple ways. What digital tools do we have for citizens to engage with? In this case, we have deployed the digital citizen application in Saldanha Bay. So all the residents have an app that the municipality can engage with, and the residents can engage with the municipality. Technology synergy for smart cities. When we start applying things like AI and real-time meter reading and those things, we can start to have a synergistic approach to how we actually utilize the data. Then at the end, you'll see how do we then have real-time AI-infused processes. So within the MuniX or service orchestration layer, even in the platform, we are looking at how do we apply AI in that. So there's certain things like self-help, self-orchestration of certain services. So in the telco sector is where we're applying those. We're using it typically in the ISP and F&O sector. How do we let the system learn how customer behavior is affecting the services, right? So it builds up a knowledge base, and we're starting to look at how do we roll that out in our platforms as well. Now, that same system, we will start to infuse into the MuniX platform as well. All right. So as a recap, if you look at a municipal network, it's pretty much the same as a telco grade network, right? So on the left-hand side is mainly where the Muni plays. So in Saldanha Bay, we've integrated the existing municipal radio networks, and those are quite a number of 2 megabit to 10 megabit links all over the place. There's some IoT related links for telemetry. And then obviously in the middle, you have the FTTH, FTTB, which has been the bulk of the fiber deployments today. So in Saldanha, we've deployed fiber to almost 40,000 endpoints, which is almost the entire across the 5 towns. In certain cases, it's just not economically viable to do that. If it's little remote pockets, then that'll be a wireless mesh, or it'll be a point-to-point wireless network. That will all eventually get pulled into a access network. We then leverage the existing data center that the municipality has. So that is their on-net services, and we integrate that directly into the fiber network. So that has been done already. Now, from the central office all the way into the core is where we'll talk about we have 100 gig network into Terraco. And then obviously everything else is cloud-based services. So now that we have that construct in place, we pull in things like mobile and fixed LTE APNs, and that is for things like fleet management and for nomadic users or staff, right? So if you start to see the picture, we now have real-time, low latency connectivity of almost every different type of access technology. So once we overlay the service orchestration layer plus the MuniX platform, you will start to see that we can orchestrate any kind of user story quite easily. So just coming back to the type of application. So when we talk about smart cities, you'll see a whole lot of these kind of scenarios, right? So it's student, it's e-learning, it's being able to get access to your accounts, electricity, water, the management thereof, traffic management, education, building plans, etc. Right? So this is a subset of a whole lot that can be pulled and orchestrated over the system itself. We're going to touch on just a few. So in Saldanha, we've done a proof of technology with VumaCam, and in that they have in the cloud management system, there is an AI platform for monitoring certain things. Cornel will touch briefly on the statistics that we achieved up to date. The stats is just for the first 30 days, where we've picked up 269 LPR alerts, suspect vehicles. And in fact, there was quite a few high-profile cases that we were also involved in. In terms of service orchestration, if you consider just the overall view, a resident logs a pothole through the digital citizen application, right? So that gets logged immediately into the platform that it's orchestrating. It orchestrates a job. It says there's a ticket. It notifies the resident that there's a reference. This is how it's been logged, and someone will be in touch, right? So you can automate this as it goes along. The municipality gets notified, they issue the job to the relevant contractor after assessing the evidence given by the resident. The contractor goes out with a clear job of what he needs to do, and he completes the job with evidence. That evidence is captured, the system orchestrates it, and it gets approved remotely. And that allows you to track the job, including KPIs of what has been done when, right? So that is just a small example, no paperwork. You could probably have a job completed within a day with evidence, and then communicating this back and paying the contractor as required. This also applies obviously to your internal staff. So keeping staff honest, keeping contractors honest, having an evidence trail of what has been done. All right. Now, all of these use cases has a bearing on the citizen. So we've deployed the Digital Citizen application. And the idea here is that you communicate with the citizen through the application. They can also communicate directly with you through the application. We are adding additional things like SOS panic, triangulation of where you are, and any number of additional functions that is required are being added to the application itself. Now, this citizen application will retrieve data based on what the orchestration layer is providing, which Cornél will touch on briefly. So if it's things like the metering data we read in real time, you can then see it in your app. But we're also adding things like alerts for if there's a potential that there's a leak, but this is where the AI will come in, is to look at the usage patterns over a certain time, and then say, well, it looks like there's something happening on this side because the usage has just been increasing almost on an hourly basis. So those are small examples, but once we have the building blocks in place, which we spoke about here, it becomes easy to provide real time. There's no uploads that need to happen. Someone needs to upload an Excel file or a CSV. We're trying to get to a point where the data is real time. We're storing it in real time. We can access it in real time, and we can manipulate it in real time as well. All right. That is just briefly the service orchestration layer, which is really the same platform that we deploy in the telco space, where we orchestrate fixed network or network infrastructure owners' environments, and we orchestrate any number of jobs, and we automate any number of jobs through the job management function, and we communicate with the digital citizen as well. I think that is it from my side. Cornél, I think maybe just a brief overview of who Amoeba is. We're a consultancy that we're based in Centurion. We operate across the telco space. OSS, BSS platforms, custom development. We provide billing systems for telcos. And obviously all of what we've learned, we're also applying in the smart muni space. We're working across 3 or 4 munis at the moment. Community and visitor management, that is the underpinnings of the digital citizen. And then we have the field service management capability as well. Cornél, that's it from my side. That was a quick introduction to the session today.
Thank you, Ashley. So I'm Cornél de Kok. I think many of you do know me by now. I'm the Director for Economic Development and Strategic Services for Saldanha Municipality. Prior to that, I started my career in government as the CIO for Saldanha Municipality. And this very much still remains a big pet project of mine, which is Smart City Innovation, which also deals with reaching our strategic objectives. So you'll see Saldanha's strategic objective is a city, our vision is a city of excellence and opportunity on the Weskus. So doing government the usual way doesn't work for government anymore, specifically not for areas such as Saldanha Municipality with a growing economy. So we need to do smarter, and we need to do more with less, and we need to be innovative. Ashley, you can move to the next slide, please. In terms of what we as government have been tasked to do, so I like referring to this slide every time I start this presentation, and most of the people in the room have seen this. I know my fellow IT managers, senior managers, CIOs have seen this several times. Government likes to make announcements of what we should be doing as government to bridge the digital divide and to enable our citizens. But they never answer the question as to how do you accomplish that. So yes, there's many ways to skin a cat. There's many ways to connect. There's many ways to distribute broadband connectivity. But are they viable? That's the question. Next slide, Ashley, please. So these are the challenges that we obviously need to guide as government. So we We sit in a difficult space, and this is what Project Baobab was about. As government, we realized that we cannot achieve these objectives on our own because we're not solving just the government problem. We're solving a problem that deals with citizens' needs and perspectives, but we're also solving a problem that has to have collaboration between private sector and government. And how do you find the balance between the two? And this slide just literally focuses on what Saldanha Bai's approach was into how do we package our projects that we do under this project. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip this slide. So actually you can go to the next one. This is what has literally been done. So I'm going to focus more on what's been delivered by this project up to date. So up to date, we have done about 650 kilometers of fiber. All of this fiber has been installed physically in the ground. So no overlays, no overhead, no wireless, broadband fiber, lookalike type stuff. It's literally fiber cable installed via traditional trenching over a 12-month period in our jurisdictional area. These numbers keep growing, obviously, as we add residents to the network. You can go to the next slide, Ashley. In terms of uptake, so this is very critical in terms of where our figures stand. Actually increased 1,000 connected to the household. Apologies for not adding that. When we distribute the slides, it will be added. So from August in 2022, there was about 1,500 when we started this project. Up to date, or to August 2025, there's about 22,400 on the network currently. And those are people that are paying for fiber services. So not getting anything for free at the moment, but paying to have broadband access and fiber operated services. Actually, you can go to the next one. Why that is important and why we keep track of it, we all know that statistic that says for every 10% of increase in broadband penetration, there's a GDP growth of 1.38%. That is a known statistic. So that's very important for us as a municipality to track potential impact of our project going forward. So if you're looking at where we sat prior to the Baobab project, it was about at 11%, and that was on fiber-based access to broadband services. The area is very limited in terms of capability, has always been. Now, post the deployment of Baobab, these are old statistics for where we ended in December 2024. Currently, the latest statistics, we're sitting on 71% going on to 72%. So that is the difference in terms of broadband penetration, just in a period of about 24 months now. If we're looking when we went live, that means that there's a potential GDP growth of more than 8% currently. You can go to the next slide, Ashley. Why the other reasons why it was very important for us was that we as government cannot provide broadband services to the community for free. We know that. Although the government makes all sorts of pronunciations that we should, we can't. It's not our core mandate. The best we can do is to lower the cost of that internet services to the end user, which is our citizens. So on this slide, you will see basic statistics of what we paid prior to our fiber network deployment for decent quality broadband connectivity. For a 20 meg connectivity on a wireless radio link, we paid about 2,644 Rand, and that was not synchronized. So it's 20 meg download and 5 meg upload. When we finished deployment of the fiber project, we had about 15 service providers going up and down as in how they go up and down the network, meaning dropping up and on, as they sign on. This is now for the ISPs. Currently, we're trading at about 15 currently active on the network. You pay about 289 Rand per 20 meg fiber installation, which means it's 20 up and 20 down. So you can see there's a vast price difference in terms of what the cost of internet for a citizen is up to date. Okay, next slide. So here I'm getting to the crux of what the matter is for the municipality. So we were asked to look specifically at why fiber and why fiber is so critical for us for smart city projects and even for AI components going on through the future. This is really what it boils down to. Yes, you can do it several ways. So you can use LoRaWAN, you can use Sigfox, you can use many data aggregators, you can use many data centers, you can use different communication methods. But this is what it comes down to, is cost. If you look at this picture, these are the touch points just for a water automation project in terms of smart metering, where you would be paying cost. And this is what tanks a project for a municipality. You can all agree with me on that. The cost of deploying smart metering It's just too expensive if you don't do it the right way. So things that we looked at in our proof of concept was open standards, so meaning that we're not tied to a specific service provider when it comes to metering, but also looking at using the same fiber optic network that was used to connect the citizens and the households to actually read the water meter. So the water meter is connecting to the same OLT device and the same equipment that is actually delivering the broadband internet services to the household. That means that inherently we can read 49,000 households after the deployment of this fiber is complete. So we literally have access to every single household inside of the home. Next slide, please, Ashley. Okay, so Ashley spent a bit of time on the citizen engagement app. Ashley, you can skip this one. You can go to the next one. So this is specifically what we can see at the moment. So on our proof of technology concept, we used a combination of a fiber, of an electrical meter and a water meter for a simple reason that our engineers installed water meters that don't have a fiber connector. So we're reading the water meter through the electrical meter. So we have an electrical meter that is fiber enabled, and that electrical meter now picks up the water meter. Not an ideal solution. A lot of our POTs are retrofitted to suit purposes in terms of what's actually deployed so that we can do better next time. So a lot of the work that we've done is reflecting on how to do things better. So we're not afraid to say when we've made mistakes, and we're not afraid to admit where we can do better going forward. What I'm showing to you at the moment is the data that's actually available on my app, for example. So these are my meters. So if the consumption looks high, please don't judge. This is electricity that you can see. So you can see it gives you real-time data of your household. So it means that I can more proactively manage the resources that I'm consuming. I can manage what I spend monthly, but I can also track when there's something going wrong in terms of consumption. For example, I managed to pick up a water leak through my electricity meter. How do I do that? My prepaid electricity kept very quickly depleting, and then I couldn't find a reason why that occurred. When I look at the data of the electrical meter, which is a conventional meter that's doing the smart metering, and also the water meter, I could see that both of them were displayed, but that it was actually a water pipe that was leaking. So my geyser kept reheating my water. So it meant I had high consumption both on water and electricity. So these are the nice things that you can do when you have tools like this. You can go to the next slide, Ashley. This is just on the water side. So you will see here, month on month, it tracks my usage. You will see currently it's showing a red line for my active consumption for this month compared to last month. So it's indicating to me that there's something wrong. My water consumption is going higher. So I get an early alert to say that there's something wrong. So current is red, last month is green. So I'm actually, I have a double. So there's an obvious indicator that there's more water consumption. So I can expect a higher bill going on to the following month. Okay, next slide. Okay, then this is what we're playing with currently is a lot of the messaging to the community and the citizens. So meaning active response and interaction with our community rather than sending a lot of loose standing SMSs. You will see every single message that was sent to me in the history of this project. If I haven't read it, it shows like on your WhatsApp or in message screens, it will show that there's unread messages, but it will keep it. So I can, at any point in time, I can go back to previous communication from the municipality. But we've also recently started implementing what we call a SOS alert system. So this thing would eventually then integrate to our control room, integrate to the police, emergency response systems. So that's the capabilities of the app that we currently have. And because we have a fiber network running over the entire municipal area that we have actual access to in terms of a virtual layer on top of that infrastructure, we can literally communicate with anybody. So it makes this communication platform very cost effective, but it also means that we are sitting on a massive load of information. Next slide, Ashley, please. So this is, for example, the water meter data that we currently carry through the OnTech platform. It is reading actively. This is just the older screenshot that I've given you. Water data meter readings on, well, you can set the frequency. Currently, ours is set to hourly read and send information. But what do you now do with this information? So you have it, but do you have the staff and the people that can actually aggregate this data, that can look at it and proactively manage it? it's fine having the IoT devices, but what do you do with the information? That's really what makes packs the blow at the end of the day. Next slide, Ashley. You can skip this one, Ashley. It's not a problem. It's also on the water meter. And then just to spend very quick time on this, I know our time is cut. In terms of future related projects for Saldanha Bay municipality, so we know now that we're sitting on a wealth of information. We have access to these IoT devices in field. We have the ability to collect the data. We have the ability even to bring it back to our own data centers and environment. But how never have to process all of this bulk information. So the next phases in Saldanha Bay's journey is how to use AI to make the interaction or the aggregation or the response to that data and the information that we are capturing more automated, so that you literally only react and interact with things that is critical. So we're looking at a how-to bot, for example, meaning using AI algorithms, and this is through a project that we're also jointly doing with David and another AI that is going to look at predicting questions in terms of community answering and responding to them, rather than speaking to an individual in the office and waiting 5 days to get a response or whatever the reality might be, but interpreting what is there and being able to respond faster. Then also in terms of our IDP and strategic documentation, these documents look the same every single year, but yet you're paying a fortune or spending a lot of hours, if you do it yourself, on aggregating that information and populating and getting a document ready. You can use better ways to do that, and that's something that we're looking into and to save time and money. Then the smart security management system, Ashley has indicated in his presentation that we do have the VumaCam solution currently running. We're using the engine called Proof to run that AI analytics. And we have had a lot of successes and help prevent some serious situations in this jurisdictional area just by using that engines and using that to track incidences and people throughout the area, and having the AI engine do the work for us. Again, municipalities won't have the resources to patrol the entire area. So the more you use these things, the better your predictions become. And then obviously on the water management side. So on the water side, we have massive lots of data, but what do you do with that data now? So the critical part that we've learned through this journey has been, and I'll conclude on that, that yes, one, you have to get the telecommunication networks ready to communicate with all those devices. Once you've done that, then you start getting all of this information. What is the quality of that information? Can you use it? And do you actually have it in the right frames or structures so that it can interact with the AI model? So in many cases, we all talk about AI, but do you actually have the underlying structures that will enable you to use that logic models and to interpret for the AI engines to interpret the information that you have? In often cases, we find that the answer to that is no. You should have it, but how do you structure and get it ready so that those tools can be running on your data that you have and that you collect? I think I'll stop there for the sake of time. It was a very quick one. But yeah, this was just what Saldanha has done and then what we are focusing on going forward. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Ashley and Cornel, for laying the foundation for the conversation going ahead. I'm not going to labor what you've said. I'm handing over to Jacques. Thank you, Jacques, for being on the platform.
Good morning, David. Good morning, everybody. Apologies, I hope you guys can hear and see me. Thank you for your time. Myself, I'm Jacques Visagie. I'm here in Pinnacle, Midrand. I look after the AI and services division here at Pinnacle. So I want to talk a little bit about, and what I must say, I must commend Ashley and the team about what they've done so far in Saldanha. It's very, very good. What I want to talk about is how do we now bring this AI into local government using smart cities? This is something that I do every day of my life, is talk to customers and talk to businesses about how do you enable your AI adoption inside of a business or inside of a smart city or anywhere. So specifically for this conversation, I want to talk about why do we need AI in local government. So there's benefits. There's benefits for citizens and there's benefits for government as well. Now, a lot of this we've already spoken about, so I don't want to hammer too much on it, but it's about having faster, better service engagements with citizens, with customers, having safer communities, having better mobility. Cornelia talked about connectivity. Connectivity is key for any type of data collection. And as you know, AI is data-centric. So the more you have of the right data, the better your AI will be. So to get the connectivity and to get better mobility is very, very crucial. It's also about having a better living environment, but also inclusive access. And that is something that's happening quite fast in South Africa, is to provide more inclusive access to technology for all our citizens inside of South Africa. When it comes to local government, there's obviously a lot of benefits using AI as well. There's increasing efficiency and cost saving. A happy citizen pays. And we all know about that, about service delivery and being able to just get what you need. Better decision making, improved public safety. We all know about the challenges around safety in South Africa, not only in South Africa, but the whole world. Having a better public safety system and being more proactive than reactive can actually help a lot. Sustainability. And it's not only technology sustainability, but we all know that resources are scarce. We need to use our resources much more effectively, and AI can help with that. But it's also about streamlining different systems. It's about interconnecting different things and systems and automation processes to make back office efficiencies, increase those, make it better for our citizens to use. So I want to talk about what types of AI is typically used. Now, this was quite interesting when I researched this, being more of a generative AI consultant than anything else. It is what type of AI is prevalent in smart cities, especially into local government. And funny enough, it is not that much generative AI. It's more predictive analytical AI, which is based on machine learning, computer vision, and data analytics. And as you can hear from the first session, that is what's actually real today. That is what's actually happening today. It's more using predictive and analytical AI to actually provide better services to our customers. Now, some of the key applications, so we've talked about this already, so I'm just going to rehash it quickly, about traffic management, smart monitoring, energy management, public safety and security, water and waste management, and environmental monitoring. So as you can see, most of the use cases that's been successful in most of the deployments of smart cities has been around monitoring, collecting data, and rightfully said, what do you do once you have that data? Now, why is predictive analytics and analytical AI the preferred way of doing things? So obviously, that has been around for quite a long time. So typical video surveillance, sensors, IoT manufacturers out there have been using AI for quite a long time. So it's a very mature technology. It's been around for 10 to 15 years. People are used to it. Analytics has been there before AI has been there. So it's much more reliable, especially if you think of this has got real world applications, it's got real world effects if there is a challenge around data and data security. ROI. The fastest way to get ROI in any type of AI is to get quick and easy cost savings. That's the easiest way to actually get ROI. Not talking about what the benefits are, it's about getting ROI much more faster. Also, the general availability. There is such a lot of systems out there already, like you've seen in the previous presentation, around what there is out there already. What's scary is a lot of it's already been used. I've been fortunate enough to were part of quite a lot of initial smart city designs in my life. And some of the stuff that's out there is quite amazing. And you wouldn't think that a country like South Africa is already at this level of automation and predictive and analytical AI inside of our local municipalities. But then the question comes, why isn't generative AI there yet? So generative AI is there, but it's not as much in smart cities as well as local government as it should be. But it's around reliability. It's a new thing. It's something that everybody is now starting with. Agentic AI that came out about a year or two ago. Having more generative AI, in other words, creating data from information, is starting to become more prevalent. But it's all about data mismatch. Especially when you start building models around generative AI, having the right data at the right time is extremely important. The maturity of the technology is also not as mature as typical predictive analytical AI. It's quite new. It's been around, like I said, for about 2 or 3 years. And also when it comes to implementing generative AI, the costs are much higher. It's much simpler to implement predictive and analytical AI from a cost perspective than generative AI. You need a lot of computing power, a lot of cooling to actually make this effective. And also misaligned use cases. Cornelia spoke about it. It's good to have all this data, but how do you correlate the data? How do you make sense out of the data? And how do you make sure that the sense you're making out of the data, especially with generative AI, is real world applicable? Is it true? Is it reliable? Is it not hallucinated? And that's one thing that I've come across in my year or two in building generative AI solutions. It's about getting the reliability and the accuracy using generative AI. So now that I've spoken a little bit about this, where do you start now? So funny enough, this is when, as an AI person, when I speak to customers a lot, is they don't know where to start, especially if you're starting off with building something new, if you're starting off building any type of smart application, any type of smart experience. AI is key to that. But where do you start? So the first thing that I talk to customers about is having the right ambition. We need to make sure that we all understand what is the need for this AI. What is the ambition? Are you building a smart city, or are you building the next Grok? Are you building a customer experience center, or just a typical chatbot to interact with customers? And what is the reason for that implementation of AI? What is that fields of action that you want to achieve? And obviously commitment around AI. AI is not a bottle of water. So anybody that knows me knows I talk about this bottle of water concept. AI is not something that you just go to the shop and you buy it and you consume it. It's something that you build. It's something that you grow into. And that's why it's very important to have that understanding about the ambition of a customer, of a municipality, of government when it comes to building an AI strategy. Then it's about use cases. Funny enough, there is thousands and thousands of use cases out there, but they're all different. Even the same use case implemented in different areas, different municipalities, different businesses are different. So you need to have that discovery and specifications, and we do that quite a lot. When we do this Discovery Ignite workshop with customers and with government, where we say, let's look at what type of use cases are prevalent and what is it that we can do. Also, make and buy. That's a very, very good discussion to have. A lot of AI is available off the shelf, but it's very isolated. And to get this super AI that connects to everything, you need to build. You need to make it. It's not available off the shelf. But where do you start? How do you get buy-in with limited amount of return on investment? And also portfolio management. I'm also quite a good believer in not having a lot of vendor lock-in. AI provides choice, but you need to make the right decisions when you look at implementing use cases for AI, even in government perspective as well. And then enabling factors. This is something that I've seen is actually one of the biggest challenges around adoption and building an AI strategy, is making sure that the organization is ready to adopt and, how can I say this, embrace AI. Do they have the right culture? Do they have the right mindset? Do they have the right expertise? If they don't have the right expertise, how do we as an AI community and a partner community out there build this expertise inside of local government? And then data. Data is not the end all and be all, but it's a very big part of AI. I've had a lot of customers that says, hey, I want AI, but they've got no data. How do you build AI? It will then be based on someone else's data, but then how relevant and true is it? Having the right technology and the right ecosystem, very important. How do I bring the different type of municipal services together using the right technology? And then it's about execution. Not a lot of customers are there yet, especially municipalities, where they can say, let's hit the green button, let's just run and have AI. It's about research, making sure that you have the right leadership, having the right thoughts around how do I need to build this AI? What is the right ambition for this AI? Also about how do I now get this developed and validated? How do I make sure that what I've implemented is correct? Am I getting the right value? Am I getting the right data creation, the right value out of what we've implemented? And then it's also how do you operationalize and maintain that AI going forward? AI is not something that you just put in and it just works. It needs to be maintained. It needs to be growing. It needs to be adopted. It needs to be enhanced. And I want to talk about how we get there. So some of the biggest challenges that I've seen around looking at this is measuring that ROI of AI investments. AI is not cost effective. It's not the most easiest thing to build, but how do you measure that ROI? So there's different ways how you do that. It's not only financially, but it's also efficiency, which at the end of the day comes back to some sort of a financial ROI. Governance, very, very important. With what's happening in the world, local governments, countries are consolidating. Having the right governance around data and having ethical AI is very important. It's pointless that you have AI that can do everything, but it tells you the wrong things. And who takes the responsibility for that AI is also very important. That's why governance is very, very key. Skills and talent. There's not a lot of skills and talent around AI, not only in South Africa, but in the whole world. And they are very scarce. And how do you get access to that talent? Do you build your own talent pool? Do you partner with someone? How do you then actually build this AI strategy based on skills and talent? Also about long-term costs and around long-term cost concerns. AI can become very expensive, especially if it's not thought through, if it's not implemented based on the right strategy. It can actually be heavy expensive over a long period of time. And that's why we see a lot of customers start with a basic POC, and then they need some guidance on how do we bring that cost effectively together into an environment that is good for long-term investment. And then also prioritizing the right use case, where to start. I've read another article again yesterday, 93% of AI implementations fail because of the right use case has not been identified, or there is not the right return on this AI investment that customers are doing. Even in local government, it's pointless to say, let's build an efficient road system that's fully automated, but there is zero communication throughout the municipality. So it's about identifying the first use case, see what is the easiest to start. And typically, what I've seen with customers, it's not only one use case, it's looking at 2 to 3, maybe 4 different types of use case to get a much better ROI. AI is something that can bring data together, that can bring systems together, and can provide a holistic experience. So having more than one use case is very important, but you need to start with the right use case. Then it's also about getting the right buy and build guidance. A lot of AI is available, like the video surveillance solutions that was mentioned earlier. They're very effective. What they've also done is they've now started building different types of gateways that can help you to correlate all this different data. And I'll talk about that in my next slide, around how do you build and bring that data now together and then build AI on top of that. It's also about having governance in by design. When you build any type of AI, the first thing, even when I started my journey here at Pinnacle, the first thing I did is I implemented AI governance policies and strategies to make sure that everybody is aligned on what is it that we need to build. What is it, where are we going? What is our strategy? What is it that we want to achieve over the next 5 years? And with that comes in governance. Data security and data privacy is very, very easily breached with AI without the right governance. It's having the right data at the right time, at the right place. Then it's about providing pricing predictability. How do you scale this? How do you grow this? How do you make sure that this is a sustainable AI implementation for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Obviously, as technology moves, we all learn, technology evolves, there's always a better way to do something the next day. So we need to have that pricing predictability also in place when we build AI. And then skills. How do we get our skills ready? And this is something that I was also dumbstruck when I saw this the first time. It's not only about technical AI skills, it's about business skills as well when it comes to adopting AI. There's a lot of customers I've seen that they want AI, but they don't know how to use it. How do you get value out of that implementation of AI? So it's not only technical skills, but it's also how do I use AI more effectively to help me to become more efficient, to provide a better service, but also to provide a better experience to customers. So how do you enable this AI journey in smart cities? And Ashley and Nicole spoke about it very briefly as well, and very in depth about it as well in the previous conversation. It's all about communication, right? Communication is extremely important when it comes to smart cities. It doesn't have to be a singular type of communication, but I do agree as well. At the end of the day, fiber optic is a very effective way to do this. But you need to still connect different types of data vectors, from physical infrastructure to MDM devices, machine-to-machine devices, vehicles, assets, people, buildings, security, environmental sensors, also other data feeds. We need to bring all of that data together through this communication layer. Now, as you can think, there is quite a lot of data that's out there. How do I now bring this data together, especially when it comes to building AI? The data ingestion and integration is very, very important. And I see that is where a lot of projects fails because they're not correlating the data correctly. The data is out of sync. But also the data is irrelevant. That's why typically what's happening there, and there's a lot of government institutions and even private institutions that's made a living of building these gateways, where we integrate different data through a standards-based and a domain-specific interface, so that we know that if we need to collect people data, this is what we need. If we need to collect physical data, this is what we need. And how do we then correlate that data into a central place, and who owns that data? And how secure is that data? It's very, very important. Once I've now got all this data ingestion and integration correct, then now what do I do with it? Then we start creating this operational data store, if you want to think about it. This is where we can have different models, different events, different workflows, and how we now correlate all this data. And then we build an environment which we can implement different types of applications on. Now that different applications is not optimized from day one. You start with basic database level application integration, then you start doing simulations and modeling, and then you get your basic business analytics out of it. After that, you start building your predictive domain analytics, and then you look at optimizing that systems. So it doesn't always just optimize out of the box. You need to start it by integrating, simulating, building the analytics, to building predictive analytics, and then building system optimization afterwards. And then you need to present that. Now there's different ways how you do that. You can build it on dashboards, you can build it into camera views, help desk environments, real-time collaboration. There's different ways how we need to interact now with this data. And like you see in the previous slide, they've done an amazing job of collecting this through this digital citizen application. Which gives you all these different ways. Also, you need to have this programmability for your interface. whether it's a programmable database, a workflow, alerts and directives, whether it's just typical data analysis in event and KPI correlation. It needs to be available and it needs to be manageable through a central spot. Obviously, security and administration, very, very important. Nothing is worthwhile if you're not building it based on security and access control management. Now, there's different ways to do this as customers authenticate, as citizens authenticate, but also government authenticating to the same application, getting different types of access. So access management to the data is very, very important. And the guys also talked about multiple access. I've seen as well, customers typically start with an application, a mobile application, start with that, but also the next phase out of that is building a chat interface or an assistant interface, having a website that you can interact with, SMS, and even WhatsApp integration and access through this application is very, very important as well. But customers need to have choice. Citizens need to have choice when it comes to interacting with government, especially in different types of environments and areas. So this is about Pinnacle. So why look at Pinnacle? But it's not only Pinnacle. It is what is it that you need to look for when you're building this AI solution of yours. And where do you start? It's always a good thing to start with a readiness assessment to see where you are. See what you have, see what is it that I might need from this assessment. That can be any assessment. It could be a physical assessment, it could be a data assessment, it could be an area assessment, but it's all starting with getting all the information. And then it's about consulting, speaking to the right people, making sure that I've got someone that I can talk to that can advise on what is the best way to do in specific environments or specific scenarios. And it's about building that strategy, that AI digital strategy and advisory relationship with a partner, or even with your own employees, with government, with private sector. How do I now build this digital strategy? And that's quite a very difficult thing, especially when a person or a government or local government or citizens are used to one way of doing things. Building a digital strategy and that adoption of that digital strategy is quite cumbersome that I've seen a lot with customers. Then it's about implementing that solution. Where do you start? How do you implement it? Do you start from the data? Do you start from the network connectivity? And the short answer there is just get everything connected. Once you connect it, we start building the data gateways and we start integrating all of that solutions together. And to have that right workflow around solutions implementation is very, very key. It's also about creating the value, making sure that what we've implemented provides value. There needs to be some sort of a value creation activity after AI has been implemented. But it's also delivering that experience. With delivering the experience is, did I actually get what I paid for? Am I hitting the spot? Am I making sure that I'm getting the right answer to my question? And am I getting it the right way? It's also about knowledge transfer. It's about education. Like I say, one of the things that we're doing a lot these days, more than anything, is educating around AI adoption, educating around how do you use AI more effectively in your day-to-day business. You need to have a partner that can give you the right experience, that's got the right methodologies, and then can provide end-to-end solutions. End-to-end solutions is not only on a specific OEM, but it's collaborating and bringing all the different solutions together, having a customer-centric approach and a commitment to excellence. And when we build AI solutions, we typically say we want to bring AI to your data, wherever it is safely and securely. It is not effective to take your data and move it closer to AI. I've seen a lot more success in bringing AI in whichever shape and form closer to your data than doing the opposite. And with that, I'm done. I thank you very much for your time and looking forward to having some good conversations.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sticking to your time for all the speakers. It was a very informative session. I've got one or two comments I want to make and one question that I'm going to throw towards Cornel and Ashley. So the question is, if you want to start to think about the answers along, my question is, how do we treat historical data that's going to feed into the AI from a municipal perspective, knowing that the historical data isn't clean? What is the effect of that on AI and the output of AI on the one side? On the other side, should our strategic approach be to cleaning up historical data? And then my comment I want to make, Jock, and this links to your presentation. There's a tendency in local government to buy something because someone saw it on a shelf somewhere. That sounds like a good idea, so let's buy it. I was involved in a project when I was in national government where 900 million rand was spent without a single computer being switched on. And it was just a good idea. It wasn't a solution. And local government has to move beyond. And this is also what our new governance system in the Western Cape province is instilling in municipalities. We need to move beyond buying off the shelf and move into how are we going to create value? And value creation comes in 3 levels. It is value to the citizen, operational value, and service delivery improvement. So thank you very much for your presentations. Can Ashley or Cornel, can you respond to my question, and then we open the floor for other questions?
Cornel, do you want to go or do you want to respond?
Yes, I can take a first step and then you can add you're really asking a complicated question, which is a serious challenge for all of us, I'm sure. I think to answer it in a simple manner is you don't know what you don't know. That's the problem. So if you don't know what the challenges in your data is, that's where your problem starts. So I think with Saldanha municipality, we clearly saw that when we started in 2016 with our ERP process. So I know that in terms of the National Treasury guidelines of how they recommended that we go through this MSCOA transition, they all wanted us to do data cleaning before we even chose a system, or whether you chose to implement or not, or to get a new system. We did not. We first implemented and then we cleaned, which was a very, very good move on our side. Our new system pointed out in our 15 business processes what the lacks in the data were. And then we started cleaning. So we almost only started cleaning 2 years later than implementing our system, because then we could clearly see what our gaps were. But surely getting into a smart city space and an AI space, we need to know what you have and what you don't have. So my recommendation would be to start there, understanding your own data and understanding what your limitations are. We often in government, for the lack of a better term, sweep that under the carpet and just move forward. But those gaps are very critical to understand. So that data mapping is something that we've done through all our POTs. So our proof of technology concepts is very much focused on that. So there's a big governance component to those projects that flag, and my private sector partners will tell you that that's not always very popular to hear what the government is doing wrong, and some departments do internalize the comments that they give. But that's why that private-public partnership on our side was so important. That's the value of it. They look objectively at the challenges that there are in the data sets. They point that out as part of that POT, and then there's obviously a management decision going forward as to how you're going to address that. So in Saldanha's case, we linked a lot of our missing data components to our asset management. So specifically for infrastructure, we have a contract for asset management with a service provider, and we've added a big component of data cleaning to that. Same with the smart water metering projects, the RT29 there's this big component of audits built into that project before we implement our smart meters. So you need to plan with the end in mind. That would be my advice.
Okay. Thank you, Cornel. Ashley, do you want to add to it?
Not really. I think it's just a case for me from a private sector perspective. It's always a case of garbage in, garbage out. So cleaning the data is important, but the data must add value, right? So you could spend an inordinate amount of money cleaning data. So it's on a case by case basis for me. But obviously there's value in the historical data, but that should not hold up the rollout of projects as a starting point to commence, right? So with a new AI-driven or new highly connected environment, capturing real-time data should be your first part. And I think Cornel have approached it quite nicely as well. So nothing further from that perspective.
Okay. Any questions from the floor? I don't see any hands raised. Okay. Thank you very much for attending the session. I will have the recording online in the YouTube channel at latest Wednesday afternoon. So thank you so much for the panel for addressing us, bringing us your views and your insights and your wisdom. And I hope that we laid a good foundation for municipalities as a point of departure. So thank you everybody that attended today. It was an honor to host you. I'm going to end the event now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.